I'm 27, and when I was 15, I discovered vintage stereo equipment and was just immediately hooked. Who doesn't love listening to loud music as a teenager? I began restoring them and learning everything that I could about different pieces of equipment. And then, when I was 19, I moved out, and sadly, I parted ways with all of my stereo equipment. Fast forward to February of this year, my longtime friend Noah asked if we could put a system together for his office that had to be small and mighty, but also on a budget. I really love thrift shopping and hunting around for stereo equipment and looking for diamonds in the rough. We were hoping to find an old Pioneer receiver and a set of small bookshelf speakers. Within a few weeks, I managed to find a set of old classic speakers that have a cult following, the Realistic Minimus 7. And a Pioneer SX434 receiver. I was on the hunt for a subwoofer at a good price when the parts showed up for the rest of the system. The receiver was in really good shape, but let out a full volume crackle through both speakers once it warmed up due to faulty transistors. So as soon as I started recording that B-roll for the front of it, it started crackling. I don't know if you could really tell from how fast I moved to go turn it off, but that was very loud and I don't wish to experience that again. One of my favorite things about old stereos is that they're built to last 40+ years and can easily be repaired. And this is one of the boards we'll be working on, so we have to remove the knobs to pull it out. When I parted ways with all my stereo equipment at age 19, I also parted ways with all of my tools, which means I have limited ability currently to diagnose individual components that could be faulty, and since the crackling on this receiver only happens when it warms up, it would be really hard to diagnose those parts anyways, so I'm just going to be replacing the capacitors on the power supply and the main amp board, as well as a few resistors and then all of the transistors that are known to be bad with age. And that should guarantee this receiver about another 20+ years of life. I rebuilt the power supply, then moved on to the arduous task of lifting the amplifier board. You have to remove all of the washers and nuts that hold the tone controls in place, as well as a couple of screws, then unscrew all of the output transistors from the heatsink and unscrew the heatsink from the board. Once you've done that, the board can be pushed backwards and pulled up to be worked on. I replaced around 30 components on this board, which took me a few hours. Then I reassembled it and plugged the receiver into a dim bulb tester, which basically limits the current that the receiver can draw. The light bulbs will also burn brighter if there's an issue with the work that I've done, which protects the receiver. The lights dimmed after a second, which usually means everything is fine. And after letting it warm up for 30 minutes with no crackling, I thought it was fixed and was excited to hear how it sounded. Oh! Okay, the suspense is like literally killing me. I have it on. This is the first full receiver build I'm doing since coming back to this from when I did it in high school. And I thought that I should have this on camera because this is just a very special moment. We're gonna listen to one of my favorite songs. We've got sound. Ooh. It's very distorted though. I didn't remember the distortion being there before, and because I hadn't tested it between working on each board, I wasn't sure which one it was coming from, or if it was even a new thing, since due to the crackling nature of the receiver, I hadn't tested it much prior to working on it. And that wasn't the only thing getting me down. I'd found a subwoofer that sounded great at the thrift store, but when I brought it home, it developed a loud hum, so I would have to find another. The other thing was that I had set a date to deliver all of this to Noah's house on the east side of the state, and that was quickly approaching. After taking a step away to clear my head, I decided to post about my issue on a stereo forum and let the experts help me. I was on a bit of a time crunch though, so while I waited for a response, I started work on the speakers. These speakers work fine, but there's what's called a frequency crossover inside of them, and basically, the stock one is very bad. I'll be building a new one based off of a design that was created by Pete and Zilch on a forum called AudioKarma. It required me to empty the guts out of the speakers. Blah. Then cut a new mounting plate out of hardboard for everything to sit on. I reused the inductor from the original crossover, but purchased all new capacitors, resistors, and an additional inductor. The crossover divides the full frequency range into segments that are sent to each driver in the speaker box, kind of like separating the yolk and the white in an egg to use for different recipes. Once the crossover was done, I installed it along with some new acoustic stuff to dampen the internal sound waves and help with bass. They sounded so much better than the originals. This triumph gave me the motivation to get back to the receiver, which had now been sitting for nearly a week. Okay, so after talking with some people and thinking about this, I realized that there had to be an issue in the power board, and I replaced a lot of the components on this power board. I replaced this red diode, and at first I thought that I did everything correctly, but you can actually see how there's an arrow under it. pointing a direction, and you can see the little black stripe on it. That's actually facing the wrong way. It's basically a gate for power. It'll only open one direction, more or less, which would explain why after testing, all of the voltages on this are low. I also realized the tuner doesn't work. So I flip that diode around and boom, it works. No more distortion, AM, FM works. The receiver is fully functional. There wasn't a ton of time to celebrate because I had less than a week until I was supposed to install this setup, and it still needed to be fully cleaned and reassembled. And I still had to find a subwoofer. I cleaned all of the controls and the inputs and outputs with electrical cleaners and lubricants to ensure crackle-free operation and the best electrical connection possible. Then, wipe down the faceplate and knobs with water and a magic eraser. Reinstalled everything and tuned up the amplifier to meet manufacturer standards. The finishing touch was giving the vinyl wrapped wood case a wipe down with magic eraser and water. It's so satisfying to see those marks disappear. I was bringing it all home when I decided to stop at Goodwill, and lo and behold, a mint looking Pioneer sub was there for only 30 bucks. I set it all up at home and had a listen. I was so happy with how it sounded. 2 days later, I started driving, and thanks to the technological advancements in the automobile and highways, it only took a few hours for me to travel about 200 miles away. Once I arrived, Noah hooked everything up and tested it in his garage. Him and his wife loved it so much that they ended up deciding to rearrange their living room around the stereo. This made me happy because I've always loved having a stereo as a centerpiece, especially if it matches the aesthetic of your decor. But maybe I'm biased because that's how my living room is. If you enjoyed this system as much as I did, feel free to drop a comment below and let me know what you think.